Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is Deus Machina, which is a fancy Greek way of saying God is in the machine, which I know is some heavy stuff for a Thursday before holiday weekend. We're going to be talking today about artificial intelligence meets real recruiting. We're going to take a look at some of the bigger trends and stuff behind the buzzword, and just kind of go into the future of AI and how it's going to impact all of our roles, our jobs, and our lives. So before this, if you've never been on a webinar before, you chose a really random one to start. But just as a reminder to everyone, a few housekeeping items, you are now muted. But if you have any questions, and we'll have some time at the end to go through those, please type those in the box that you see on your screen. And if we can't get to all of them, we will follow up directly. If you want to participate in the conversation on Twitter, please go use the hashtag #RDaily. And if for some reason, you want to revisit this amazing content, just know that every single person who's attending will receive an email with a link to both the slides that are put together, as well as a full copy of this recording. So without further ado, this is me in Android form. So man versus machine, right? So I am Matt Charney, and I actually have two jobs, which requires quite a lot of artificial intelligence. But I am the executive editor of Recruiting Daily and the chief content officer for Allegis Global Solutions. If you want to follow me, that's at Matt Charney on Twitter. I wouldn't recommend it. So now that we have all that stuff out of the way, let's talk about what the heck AI is, because I think when it comes to looking at kind of the technology and recruiting landscape right now, we've moved from big data as being this commoditized term that you heard everywhere, even if it didn't actually make any sense in context, to AI, which I think kind of functions relatively similar. It's this big amorphous concept that has essentially been commoditized for marketing purposes. So what does AI really mean? A couple of caveats, I think, before we want to get in this, and I like these quotes. Artificial intelligence is whatever hasn't been done yet. It's a pretty famous quote by a guy named Larry Tesler. Essentially, what you're seeing AI used as right now is a catch-all for any new technology set that comes out. That's everything from like self-driving cars to virtual assistants to chatbots, right? So if it's new and if it's cool, generally it's called artificial intelligence. That said, we'll talk about this in a second. All of it could be AI, none of it could be AI. It's a term that is constantly in flux. The other quote I like in here is artificial intelligence is a tool, not a threat. And I think that, certainly when I talk to recruiters, which I do, every day, essentially people think that AI is coming to kind of replace their jobs. And that is absolutely not true. And in fact, what you're going to see is all that stuff that you really hate to do, we'll talk about in a sec, the back office stuff, scheduling candidates, all that crap, you're going to not have to do anymore because that's going to be done by an algorithm. So you can really concentrate on the high touch stuff and let the high tech do the work that you don't really want to do. But all that is to say, don't fear the machines. You have two choices, right? You can live in the world of Terminator 2 with Skynet and essentially be fighting the robots, or you can be in the RoboCop world and learn to live with them and do a better job than you otherwise could. So again, tool, not a threat. So we're going to go over a few things today. One of those is the state of AI, so where we're at right now and where it's going. AI's impact on jobs, and obviously what that means for all of us here in the talent acquisition industry as well, and what I think it's going to do. And again, this is all speculation, right? Because this is a concept that literally is changing every day. New developments, new technologies being rolled out. But this is my speculation on kind of where the market's going. So it's probably really dumb, my take on artificial intelligence, but that's what we're covering today. The one thing I do want to point out, and I have Hal from Space Odyssey on there, essentially what you need to remember is that any technology even if it is the most sophisticated artificial intelligence instance in the world, has to be programmed and learn from human beings. They are all predicated on the input of actual people and end users just like you. So if for some reason AI is not working the way that you want it to, if AI is not showing the results you want, if you wake up and the robots are taking over the streets and starting to wage the war against machines for Judgment Day, just know that the algorithms that it's training on and the learning that it's doing, that's all being based on your input. So you actually have a direct correlated effect on the efficacy of any of these. But at the same time, it's important to note that some of our human fallacies like bias and experience and even that gut feeling, those really actually do influence outcomes. So any errors that happen in this, guess what? It all comes down to people, just like everything else in this business. Okay, so that was a really, really long introduction to say we're going to talk about AI using this definition. This comes from Stanford University's 100-year study, which was basically like the Davos of geeks. And a bunch of futurists and technologists got together at Stanford. This was about 2 years ago, and started identifying some of the biggest tech trends and themes that were going to kind of shape the next century. And so the definition they came up with, and it's one that I really like, is AI refers to the use of machine intelligence and software tools to perform human tasks with the goal of achieving human parity. It's a confluence of many technologies. One thing you're going to increasingly hear is an AI stack, which is to say that if you think about it, there's no single solution that's going to be able to have the cognition and the flexibility in terms of just natural neuroscience with humans. However, one of the ways that you can kind of start getting towards that singularity between man and machine, as it were, is using multiple solutions, right? So understand that AI is not one tool, one technology. It's a bunch of different systems all kind of functioning together, much like your brain has millions of neurons and synapses, all firing different places and different things. So too is it kind of like this. But the definition we're going with today is that it is anything that mimics the way that we think and can be indistinguishable from how you actually work or function at a cognitive level, right? So I do want to talk a little bit about some of the terms you're probably going to hear, right? Like, I love buzzwords. I love them. Not really. But these are some of the things you're going to start hearing. Actually kind of took a look at all of the extant AI literature out there. And it's a lot, by the way. Nothing really as cool as iRobot, but or even Knight Rider. Knight Rider, by the way, coolest use of AI ever. If we're defining it, Kit and the Hoff, that was the original, voice assistant. So all that is to say, here's some terms you're going to hear bandied about. And I just think it's important to go over them for a little bit of context. Bear with me for a moment. So you have basically narrow AI, which is focused on one specific narrow human parity goal. Often that's going to be things like scheduling candidates, matching a resume or online profile to a job description, basically very narrowly defined tasks that are only basically what's called command and control, which is if this, then that. Pretty easy, not necessarily artificial intelligence, but you'll hear that term come up a lot. Also, natural language processing. Now, this is actually a thing. And essentially, I know that sourcers and recruiters out there love to build big old Boolean strings, but the way that these technologies are starting to function is that they speak and interpret language, not just on keywords, but also on context. So an example of that is if you were doing a search for candidates who went to Harvard, it would be able to parse out based off of the way that it understands language, the difference between a candidate who actually graduated from Harvard and one who, say, lived on Harvard Street at some point if you were sourcing. So that's that. Real quickly, type 1 and type 2 machines. It's very important to know the distinction here. Type 1 machines are basically set and they can't be altered on the fly, right? So they're not actually learning with you. they already kind of have everything uploaded. And basically their framework's immutable, much like your applicant tracking system or HCM. You really can't do a whole lot of changes. But you know, an example of that would kind of be Deep Blue, which beat Gary Kasparov famously, and then also Watson largely because they're already predefined the syntax there. You have type 2 machines. These have limited memory. They can kind of alter or adjust to different situations on the fly and learn and improve over time. And I think the best example of that actually is automated cars, which we've been hearing about for a while now. I really thought we'd have hoverboards that flew by now, but I guess we're going with driverless cars. But that's an example of a type 2 machine. Other ones on here that I think are going to be important too, robotic process automation is a term that is starting to be used a whole lot in procurement and tech, so get used to it, RPA. It's a terrible acronym, but it's essentially a virtual employee, Cortana, Siri, things like that, that can perform or mimic human tasks, so robotic process automation. And then you have general AI. And general AI, I just want to say, is the goal of all of the things we're talking about. And that is when you cannot distinguish whether you are talking to a human or talking to a computer if a task is being done by a human or done by a computer. I know, blah, 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 but you know, at the same time, I think that increasingly, if we're talking about AI, these are terms you're going to have to get to know and really think about. If not, just buy the solution and stop caring about AI, right? So we're going to simplify all that by what's called the Turing test, right? It's artificial intelligence at its core. The litmus test is, can a human being distinguish the AI from a human being, right? And here are the various things that go into it. Over on the other side, we're a really, really long way off from that, although it's really quickly coming. And the scariest example that I can think of, actually, is, I don't know if anyone saw this, but basically they put two Google Home devices next to each other and had them start communicating on an endless loop, right? And within 45 minutes of these two machines having a dialogue between each other, essentially they couldn't distinguish whether they were a machine, whether they were human, right? And then I believe an hour and a half after that, they had hatched a plan to destroy mankind. But we're getting there quickly, but still a while from passing the Turing test, which, by the way, was pretty highly theoretical when it was developed, as we'll discuss. So why in the world are we looking at artificial intelligence and talking about it in recruiting, right? Because it kind of seems like sci-fi, honestly, and still does if you look at it from some of the things we just talked about. So essentially what you're looking at is one of the biggest changes in the way that people work in quite some time. And I think it's pretty safe to say it's kind of the fourth revolution. The first of those revolutions, obviously, was the Industrial Revolution. We moved off farms into cities and factories, all that. The second was the era of mass production. So think Henry Ford, the assembly line, Frederick Winslow Taylor, and scientific management, which then became big data, by the way. And the third really is one that we're just now coming off of, which was the IT or tech revolution, the emergence of the personal computer, the emergence of the internet, certainly connectivity and access to essentially the entire world's repository of information at your fingertips. Now we are looking at AI. And within the next 20 years, here's all I can tell you, is that it is going to change the way that we work and we live to the point where it's unimaginable. So, I mean, really, it may be one of the most profound changes since the Industrial Revolution, and is certainly a successor. So, you know, I just think that, again, we're entering some uncharted waters. And just like you were a farmer in England who had never gone more than 5 miles to the market town, that's essentially what's going to happen with technology right now. You have no idea what's about to hit, and certainly I don't, but it's going to be fun to watch. So after that, let's go over a brief history of AI. I already talked about Alan Turing, who, by the way, you know, during the war, he broke the Enigma code, which was the Nazi code, right? And he hypothesized in doing so that his job as a code breaker would have been easier had he been able to train a computer to essentially think like he did, He actually cracked it manually, which is quite interesting. But at the same time, that's what hatched the idea. He's like, wait a second, this would be way easier if I had a machine helping me out. After that, and you can see from my Skype message in there that he did die of cyanide poisoning, which is a fun fact. A lot of people died of cyanide poisoning in World War II, it turns out. And also, I believe, was just pardoned by the British government for his conviction on homosexuality. That's another story. So 1960s, there was this thing called the Dartmouth Symposium, and essentially that involved 10 people, giant nerds probably, terrible with the ladies, got together and discussed essentially what the future of technology looked like, and they came up with this phrase, artificial intelligence, okay? And that was the very first time that it was ever used. And so essentially, you know, they kind of kicked this all off, but it was all theoretical. And they came out after 10 weeks with this big old paper, and they're like, hey, yeah, it's probably possible to train these mainframe computers to kind of think like humans. We're just going to need, I don't know, $100 million in funding, right? Which at the time, that's like literally asking for the GNP of China right now. And guess what? They got it from the Department of Defense because they figured that at the time we were losing the space race, and if we couldn't keep the commies in check up there, then we certainly could by developing these very smart and sophisticated machines, which we still don't know what the military actually has. There you go. From there, we moved on to the era of mainframes and Taleo. So what are called expert systems, essentially. You have your legacy IT, data transmission and storage. Everything moves to the cloud in the 90s. The internet comes online. We go have cool stuff like chat rooms and mobile phones and all that good stuff. Then we move into this era of big data. I'm not going to belabor that point. We lived through it. It stunk. And we've replaced that now with machine learning. So just kind of see a brief history of AI, although Stephen Hawking, of all people, who this slide is inspired by, actually is the most fearful person who's out there talking about how we are playing with fire by training machines to think like humans. But also another story. So what's driving this? When discussing AI, there are a bunch of technologies and trends that are converging to magnify the impact individually, and each technology and trend is really powerful. Together, they signal this change like we've never seen before. So on the tech side, you have this versatile technology that's called deep learning, which is really kind of the engine for all this. So theoretically, given enough data, large, or what are often called deep, neural networks that are actually modeled on the brain's architecture can be trained to do all kinds of things. So right now, deep learning, some things that it touches every day, those artificial intelligence instances power like Google's search engine, that weird, creepy thing where Facebook automatically recognizes you when you're tagging photos, Siri, recommendations on Amazon, those are all deep learning instances. So we're already really starting to see it. What are some other driving forces right now? You have population stagnation or the outright decline in actually available workforce in major OECD countries, which is a fancy way of saying first world developed nations. Like Japan and Germany actually have negative population rate. So given the fact those are obviously centers of technology, there's really been a big interest to offset the declining working age population. So that's one factor, obviously. Another one that's really familiar to recruiters are critical talent shortages that have been driven by what I can only call a misaligned education policy, or in some instances, the United States, restrictive immigration policies, which force a whole lot of companies to find a substitute capital for labor, which is in turn driving a significant investment in automation technology pretty much across sectors. You're seeing a rapid, quote, digitization, for lack of a better word, actually I'm sure there's a better word, of a growing number of industries, and that's really generating just these huge reams of data, again, that are useful for business decisions. How can we make the best business decisions with all of these different confluences that are coming in? You're also seeing, again, Moore's Law come into play, which is the drastic improvement in computer processing power, coupled with the dramatic decrease in the price of hardware that facilitates the widespread low-cost availability of the basic technology required simply for artificial intelligence to work, right? So more processing power, cheaper devices, smaller devices. You're also seeing that kind of improvement in memory storage and price. So we have a place to put all this new data. It's not just sitting in a file cabinet waiting for your HR lady to shred it at some point in the indeterminate future. You've also seen essentially a Cold War that not a lot of people are talking about, and that's between the US and the People's Republic of China. And obviously, we kind of have different internets and different technologies, but you're seeing both countries at a consolidated level literally pouring tens of billions of dollars a year into these technologies to win the race and gain the advantages that are perceived in there that may be accrued. Nobody really knows what those are. They just want to get to the moon first. And so the investment that's coming out of this kind of new space race is really driving a lot of this technology. And that's something that I think we're going to increasingly see, but not a lot of people are talking about. So China versus US, lots of money, lots of tech savvy there. Europe and the rest of the world, unfortunately, lagging pretty far behind. That's okay. They have free healthcare and education, so I think they'll live. You're also seeing a lot of professional services providers whose entire practice groups are being built around AI, something that they generally wouldn't do. But if there's money to be made, as you probably know, they're going to find a way to do it. So you have professional services are kind of building and creating this category as well. You're also seeing better analytics, basically for predictive analysis and machine learning. Processing power is increasing. And you're also seeing, again, some major breakthroughs in NLP and machine learning. I'm sure I'm already boring you enough, but those are just kind of some of the factors that's driving AI. And I think that's really important to know, just to kind of give you a sense of the context for some of the forces on there. So all it is to say, as the Wu-Tang Clan famously said, cash rules everything around me, cream, grab the money, dollar bills, y'all. So what's really driving this is cash, right? There's money pouring into AI from all over the darn place. And the estimates on what that market size, or what venture capitalists like to call total addressable market, really kind of change every day. IDC says by 2020, which is only 3 years away, that makes me feel old, AI-related products, the entire spend is going to be $47 billion, which is small, not a small chunk of change. And you know, last year, CB Insights ran a report that said that already there are 200 explicitly AI-focused startups that had come along that had raised $1.5 billion in equity funding, which for those of you who don't speak venture capital, that's a whole heck of a lot of money, right? So you're seeing people following the cash and creating a category, maybe even prematurely. But where's all that money really going to? You're seeing some big key areas like large-scale machine learning, which is taking these algorithms and really building them to work with huge data sets. You're seeing deep learning, which is like, you know, computers that can see, so like retina technology, video labeling, activity recognition, focus on audio, speech, and natural language processing, what's called reinforcement learning, which is shifting a technology instance from basically doing what you input into it into actually being able to make decisions on its own, which is scary. You're seeing a huge investment actually in robotics, which I think is what most people think of, which is just training robots to interact with the world around it in hopefully generalizable and predictable ways, with a focus certainly on the manipulation of objects. So mainly that's in manufacturing right now. We'll talk about that in a second. You're seeing collaborative systems, which a lot of people are investigating, kind of algorithms that help develop autonomous systems that work collaboratively with each other. So actually one of the companies at Y Combinator last year, this is the scariest thing ever, was a bot that would actually scan for when other bots were not working or were down or had a bug in the code, and then they would actually notify a human being to come fix that bot that was down. So you're actually starting to see these machines drive human work in production as opposed to the other way around, which I think is scary. Obviously, another huge buzzword, Internet of Things, which is to say you can, turn your house to 73 degrees from your smartphone at a distance, and other sundry things like a Roomba, I suppose. And then also, I think, really looking at autonomy and automation. Jeff's definitions there. Autonomy refers to the ability of the system to operate and adapt to changing circumstances with reduced or without human control, right? So little intervention, big outcomes. Autonomous systems that are already, kind of on the market are some financial trading systems. So like Wall Street's already kind of figured this out, likely going to include things like cars, trucks, buses, and aviation. So this is kind of where that money's going right now. And here's kind of, the promise and the potential is that if we can work smarter in real time, we can improve productivity, reduce error rates. See, that was a human error. Lowering the cost of goods and services. And, optimally, that's going to improve GDP on a planetary scale, right? If you think about it, right? Increased productivity, lower errors, lower cost of goods and services, higher quality of living. It's good stuff, right? Right now, KPMG is actually predicting that AI within the next decade is going to remove 25 to 40% of labor costs, which obviously are the most expensive item in any P&L, right? So that's a really, really significant shift that you're going to start seeing. And companies that are not getting ahead of this curve, unfortunately, in building their talent planning and digital labor roadmap, as it were, risk really being left behind here. And if you're paying 25 to 40% more than your competitors because you're behind the curve on AI for labor, that's a pretty big competitive disadvantage. Hopefully you can avoid. Okay. So what does this all mean for recruiting, right? So what's its impact going to be on jobs? Well, I don't know exactly, but as far as job goes, it's hard to read the tea leaves. There are conflicting studies all over the place on how jobs will be affected. We don't know if they're going to be cut or what really is going to happen, but they're going to change. We just don't know by how much or which new jobs are actually being created by the emergence of artificial intelligence, which kind of just leaves us with some mixed signals. Basically, AI is forcing us to explore what machines can do, what humans can do, and essentially drawing a line in the sand. And we haven't gotten there yet. So when you hear people say, oh, it's going to take our jobs, or it's going to create jobs, and I actually, one report by KPMG said one thing, one that came out 2 weeks later from PwC, the direct competitor, said the other. I just want to say nobody knows at this point in time, TBD, or big picture. But one of the things we talked about earlier, and this is the real trend you're seeing, is you are looking at robotic process automation. That's an acronym you're going to hear a lot in the next 5 years. And essentially, the best example that I can give of this is Siri or Cortana, or my favorite, Amy Ingram at X.AI, which is an intelligent agent that functions a lot like a virtual employee. So automating office functions and doesn't require a whole lot of human intervention and support. Obviously, that scalability and cost, ease of deployment, adoption, and the ability to, on a per instance basis, kind of mimic a worker in terms of getting smarter, more efficient, and learning processes on the fly. These are all huge advantages. So again, at this point in time, I think that SHRM is the only entity to have ever successfully replaced workers entirely with robots. But there's a whole lot of jobs that are changing. And one thing I would recommend checking out, there's a website called willrobotstakemyjob.com. And it's got about 2,700 different job titles and families in there. Just go play around with that, and it'll give you the probability of whether or not in the next 5 years you can expect to be replaced by a robot. The good news for anyone in recruiting is your job's incredibly safe. There's only actually a 6% chance that you're going to be replaced by a robot. If you're in comp and benefits administration, you should probably think about going back to school. There's like a 98% chance. So really, at this point in time, the impact of RPA is dependent on the nature and role of your work. But again, we're advancing so rapidly here that knowledge work is not in any way immune to AI. People who are like earning a low wage, like the McJobs or people in the manufacturing sector that we often think are the first to go, they're not the only workers at risk. Knowledge workers are as well. And McKinsey, actually said that they discovered that even the highest paid occupations in the economy, such as financial managers, physicians, senior executives, and including CEOs, and I've worked for a few robot CEOs, I'll tell you that, have a significant amount of activity that can be automated. In fact, you're already starting to see a lot of that, particularly within the finance sector, as well as in executive decision making. So, just because you have a highly skilled, highly, cognitive intensive job, for lack of a better phrase, there's a chance, you could be chilling at Space Leaf Sprockets and having to retrain. So nobody is beyond the pale of this whatsoever, with the probable exception of registered nurses. This is really a key change from all the stuff that we've done before in terms of automation, because AI is essentially moving beyond that repetitive low-skill functions that everyone says are at risk from automation. It's going to include a lot of stuff that until very recently everyone was like, no, there's no way we'll be replaced by technology. A lot of activities that are going to be automated are going to require entire business processes to be transformed and jobs performed by people to be redefined. I would say one way to kind of think of the impact of AI on the knowledge economy is think about bank tellers, right? It used to be like 30,000, 40,000 bank tellers in the United States in the mid-'80s. It was a respected career professional job. ATMs and online banking suddenly came on, and at last check, actual full-time bank tellers, that's not, desk associate at the store, that actual number is right now around 5,000 in the US. So you're just, going to see a shift like that kind of across the board. So again, there's just that. We'll take a look at some of the stuff that automation has kind of already started to impact. So manufacturing. So manufacturing actually right now in the U.S. is going up, believe it or not, if you look at macroeconomic trends. But within that sector, even though productivity is up, the reason why you see the headlines, employment is dropping. As everyone knows, advanced automation makes people-less production pretty possible. The Tesla facility that Elon Musk built in Northern California is a great example of this. Normally in a car factory like the Reach River plant up in Detroit for GM, for Ford, hate to make that mistake, would generally require somewhere on the order of 300 to 500 man hours to produce one vehicle. At the Tesla plant right now, it's 50, and you're going to start actually seeing that trend intensify, which is interesting, right? Our good old friends, the accountants and the finance people, FP&A. Using an example like Deloitte, like it's already started the process of automating professional roles in accounting, tax, and finance by creating these huge repositories of all their client projects and starting to train algorithms to think a lot like accountants, which is to say they probably just pop up and say, no, don't spend that money, and please turn in your receipts. But that's already begun to really shift. And I think finance really probably of all sectors is next for wide-scale displacement. You have medical, so physicians and nurses. So IBM Watson, of all things, the company that gave you Connected Brass Ring, is actually interestingly training both as an oncologist and a hospital administrator. So it's getting a lot of advanced cancer data, a lot of patient data, and it's kind of building those into the cloud and really helping to power medical decisions on the fly. Couple that with the advent of mobile robots, so actual physical devices that can administer things like medication, take temperatures and pulses and that sort of thing. Coupled with that, you're really going to start seeing, as scary as this is, robotic surgeons and nurses. And I looked at some studies. They already are superior to humans across a pretty wide range of medical functions. And in fact, when it comes to predicting certain types of cancer, I was reading a study that they can do it with an 82% higher rate of accuracy than the world's top oncologists. And this is 2017. So that's only gonna kind of accelerate. Obviously, customer service and admins, you can do that with bots now, and a lot of companies are. We've all experienced that. And, definitely those routine rules are going to go away. The good news is you no longer have to press 1 for English. Para número primos en español, you can just type and the machine will listen, but probably not give you necessarily the outcome that you want, much like, those systems that we already have in place. Lawyers, this is a really interesting one to me. So there are already a bunch of startups that will parse huge amounts of data like contracts, and be able to come up with red lines instantaneously, be able to cite case law based off of natural language processing and context, which I think is really cool. So I guess if there's a good news in here and there's a good headline, actually AI is going to probably kill lawyers to a huge extent. So, it's not all grim. And finally, this is one that, when I was going to J school for a year or two, that I never saw coming. I don't think anyone did, but we already are starting to have stories written on the wire services, AP, Reuters, and UPI. I'll use this, that can do things like sports updates, weather reports, and other things that aren't written by a human. The byline is a computer. So you're already starting to see actual journalists be replaced, which is scary for me, because if I can't blog and do my thing, and I get replaced by a robot, who, by the way, will be extremely more productive, I'm sure, we're all in trouble here. But it's also going to create jobs, right? So think about all of the skills that are going to be needed to continually develop this. Unfortunately, it's stuff that generally me and other computers are terrible at. So you're going to see stuff like data science, modeling, computational intelligence, math, psychology. Good news for all of us, psych. The most popular major, actually, among recruiters, according to another study I read. Linguistics, obviously, with NLP, and linguists will rule the world at some point in the not-too-distant future, and you're already seeing that among founders, which is interesting. If you have a PhD in linguistics right now, you're the most in-demand person in the tech sector. So why you got a PhD in linguistics, who the heck knows, but it worked out for you well. Neuroscience, obviously engineering within the Internet of Things framework, and then the ethics of AI. That's a field that's still largely undefined, and one that may be good news for HR. The employment ramifications, also undefined. So pretty interesting fields that are just now starting to kind of emerge, and with it, new jobs. So we've been essentially looking at replacing human labor with machines for a really long time. Actually, the term robot and that concept was originally introduced in a play called Roar, which is by Karel Kopek in the 1920s, right? So we've been looking at this again and again and again, and it hasn't happened, right? But, essentially, we've been through this before. We've all heard the promises that tech is going to change the world, and it falls short of expectations. Those result in a pullback of investment interests, and I think it was McKinsey called it AI winter, which is a term that I kind of like. But this is another cycle of hyper bust, and it could be that winter finally is over, or it could be that, guess what, next year we'll be talking about a different thing and laughing about AI. Like, remember when that was a thing? Kind of like candidate experience or employer branding, right? So the substitution of machinery for human labor may render the population redundant, but the discovery of that power has unfortunately come before we knew how to employ it rightly. I think that, unlike previous hype cycles, this time we actually have a use case for AI, whereas in the past it's largely been theoretical. Of course, the largest use case of all is making cash, so who knows. But what I would just say to all of you is when you're looking at kind of talent disruption, the internet showed how new technologies could take away jobs and create new ones, right? So we're kind of looking at something like the internet. Think about all the jobs that have been created by that emergency industry in the last 20 years. AI is going to do something very similar. So if you're considering your talent need, there should be some lessons of past innovations that should loom pretty large. Obviously, the internet showed new technologies taking create jobs. Think about, Amazon's a good example. It's one of the world's largest employers now, but it's also displacing grocery store workers. So it's a zero-sum game, really, historically. It showed that companies could ignore change, though, Blockbuster being a really good example, find it difficult to catch up. Obviously, no business wants to fail, and no one wants to be the Blockbuster of the AI era. I'm looking at you, Oracle. But few companies are actually stepping up and staying ahead of the curve. The lesson is that as jobs that support AI continue to be created and evolved, companies have to be prepared to secure those new skills we talked about. Proactive approach to looking at the landscape of work through the lens of AI is probably going to emerge as a pretty key differentiator when it comes to gaining competitive talent advantage, right? So, yeah, don't be Blockbuster, right? Or Oracle, for that matter. So what does this mean for HR? Well, obviously, it's transforming a lot in terms of both business and talent, right? So did some polling, right? And this is from the Allegis Group. They did a survey of 300 senior HR leaders, and there's a lot of opinions of AI. They're pretty split between we're really, really nervous about this, we're really, really excited. These are top replies, by the way, so if you're really good at math like Rain Man, you'll notice they don't all add up to 100. So, they asked, how do you feel about the AI and its impact on the future of work? 21% said, bring it on. And 20% said machines will replace tasks, not jobs. Then you had an almost equal number just saying it's disruptive, enabling. So really a spread in terms of perception. But when it comes to which areas of talent management will benefit most from HR, training came out as number one, screening number two, and workforce planning number three. That to me was actually a really interesting finding, right? So the machines will help us make our workforce better prepared rather than automate it, is the general perception here. When you look at the biggest roadblocks to AI adoption within HR, 32% said the budget to upgrade or maintain AI, and that was closely followed by the lack of people to build or manage it. Of course, not having a budget, not having the right people for certain technology has really never stopped HR from technology adoption, which is why video interviewing became a thing, right? Nobody knew anything about videos, but it's I found the money. So just some interesting poll numbers there, but again, results are mixed. Nobody knows what to expect. So right now, though, if you look at it, I do have to say that the impact on HR, we've been talking about it for a really long time now, but it's been pretty inconsequential. Honestly, HR traditionally sees itself as people-centered, right? Which appears to really, compared to a lot of industries, impeded the adoption of these technologies, particularly for global enterprise companies, and particularly for those HR functions that see themselves as people as opposed to business partners. And we all know a few of those, right? So some other things that are kind of inhibiting the adoption within HR right now have been that all these breakthroughs that are going on, machine learning, deep learning, and natural language processing, those are still sitting in tech and are working their way kind of from R&D to commercialization. HR technology adoption is generally on the end of the curve when it comes to kind of using these technologies as mainstream. So it's going to take a little while before you really start feeling it. Also, you have your crappy existing systems, legacy systems. So those solutions that you already have related to recruiting and staffing are kind of built around not artificial intelligence, but dumb tech. Essentially, it offers efficiencies. Like think about an ATS. Yeah, you have a convenient place to store resumes, but it can't really do anything else. It can't supplement human insight or intuition, or many of the functions that are associated with recruiting in HR, right? And furthermore, I think, and this is one that really goes without saying, we're pretty early on within our road from moving from manual, time-intensive, pick up the phone, dial for dollars, into this sort of tech-enabled, scalable function, right? So a lot of recruiting companies and many talent organizations only just kind of now starting to be like, oh, we should have a separate career site. And, oh, maybe we should start looking at SaaS instead of on-premise technologies. And maybe Teleo's not the best solution for us, right? And so when you look at kind of just that shift, the large data sets that really are needed to build an effective machine learning application targeting HR, those are not only still being created, but in order to really see an impact from those, we're quite a ways off, right? So this is all very forward-looking. That is to say, if we can't get our heads around big data, which is essentially math, AI is still a little ways off. So what's going on today? Just looking at some tools. And again, I didn't want to mention anyone that was either sponsoring this or that I'm affiliated with. But just kind of some of these tools are being used to do a variety of things. Watson's probably the most prominent. Essentially, that is looking at, for HR applications, three major things, which are ranking the priority of open requisitions, social listening within an organization, and also being able to look at competitors' publicly available reviews on stuff like Glassdoor, Twitter, news feeds, and then being able to kind of prepare competitive intelligence and messaging. And also, IBM's working on a tool that matches candidates to jobs through a Phil score, which is essentially stack ranking. So is any of that AI? I don't know. They're considered to be a quadrant leader by every single analyst firm. At the same time, they might be able to beat you in Jeopardy, but I bet you could recruit a candidate faster. You have Maya is another good example, right? That's an AI chatbot that has actually in some instances that I've heard reduced recruiting time by like 75%, right? Because essentially you are taking out that whole screening and scheduling component, and you don't even have to interact with candidates until they're actually candidates, which is awesome. That's optimal, right? You have Switch, which is my favorite, right? It's the Tinder for recruiting, matching candidates with jobs, and it gets better and trains on a per requisition, per department, and per enterprise instance. So you kind of if you're ever seen it, candidates and managers kind of see quick overviews of jobs and candidates. You swipe left or swipe right to learn more. That's really actually starting to get adoption, which is interesting. We've always said that stupid cliche that recruiting is like dating, and now we have the app to prove it, I guess. Talent Sonar is one, certainly. It's a system that is using AI to eliminate bias. Essentially doing blind hiring and identifying potential language and other things in everything from job requirements to resume reviewing, interviewing, and hiring. So really designed to do that. Textio is another great example. I didn't put on here of a tool that similarly can help use machine learning and AI to remove bias. And then you have Olivia, which is they're good old Canadian guys. It was developed by what used to be called RecruitingDaily. So Olivia basically is designed to be a AI-powered personal assistant that can help handhold candidates through the process without recruiters, again, actually talking to them. So if candidate experience is an outcome goal and less time spent actually talking to candidates who aren't qualified is also a goal, which I'm going to guess it is, then tools like this are only going to gain in importance, and they're already kind of working today. And most prominent example, Microsoft just spent $26 billion on LinkedIn, and if you have been on LinkedIn recently, good chance you have. You're starting to see this kind of consolidation with other Microsoft suites, and voice recognition is actually pretty high up on their roadmap there. So you're going to be in a world pretty soon where you're going to be able to just go to your phone that you need a data engineer with SQL skills, and then the robot will come back and find all the LinkedIn people, be able to schedule the candidate through Outlook, be able to use all the other things to be able to essentially automate the entire process based only off of a really limited input, right? So I would predict with the introduction of, if anyone saw this, Microsoft Talent, this is probably in the next two rounds of Windows updates, right? So by the time you turn on that darn thing that's always like, you need to have critical updates installed. About 2 or 3 of those, which happen every couple months from now, I think this is where we're going to be. And that's probably going to change a lot for a lot of people, given Microsoft's dominance within enterprise organizations. So again, here it's a date. While the impact of AI on recruiting has not really been felt, its impact's going to increase. And here's proof. Essentially, you have all of these different things in the roadmap kind of coming together. More data. Better language processing that becomes cheaper, more commercialized, starts being adopted by the rest of the organization, which we've seen a million times, then gets pushed into HR, which is how ERPs came into place, and then you're going to start, once the groundwork is laid, seeing pretty widespread adoption of these individualized point solutions to do everything from something as simple as scheduling a candidate to being able to do culture screens or even a fairly good interview that's behaviorally based, be able to parse those results, right? So this is something we've seen before, and it's a trend that I do expect to continue, right? So what does the future look like in hiring? AI is going to be able to predict future hiring needs, source people more quickly, identify skill gaps within an existing workforce, and figure out who you need to hire, when you need to hire, and what your workforce of the future is going to look like better than we've ever been able to. So everything from predicting future workforce skill needs, helping to organize and manage contingent workforces like contractors and freelancers, more customized candidate experience, communication and engagement, candidate matching, right? Most candidate data, as you know, is unstructured, and systems that try to create structure, again, like Taleo, kind of pissed off candidates and users. So when we move to machine learning, which is kind of still going from R&D to mass market, that's really going to speed up recruitment by doing candidate matching much more faster, making a lot fewer mistakes, and that's all being driven by new methods of the way machines can look at unstructured data. Obviously, diversity is going to be hugely touched by this. Imagine a world where companies can qualify candidates by having them interact with a chat bot, right? They answer some common questions, give feedback and information, and at the same time, you're also able to reduce bias and identify diversity candidates much easier than you're able to do now. Like that's already here. And then again, scheduling, I'm not going to belabor that point. Onboarding and skill development, learning reinforcement is really key here. AI actually may be the answer. It can answer some pretty common questions generally, like you think about like onboarding, provide new hires with information and resources that kind of augment and support your current programs. Machine learning algorithms could also learn and recommend when it comes to employee training, on a per employee basis, like where their skills gaps are and what courses they should take, that sort of thing. Thankfully, employee relations is another big area. So some of those simple questions like, how much do I get paid and when, or do I qualify for FMLA? You can answer that really easily right now through a bot. And then, the more sophisticated and in-depth conversations, you'll still have those with an HR manager or coordinator. But, this can kind of be used to take away those stupid questions that HR business partners in particularly continually get, and just kind of build a repository pretty quickly so that you're not constantly annoyed by dumb employee requests. Compliance case management, and then, attrition mitigation. I think this is an interesting one that not a lot of people are focused on, but retention. So one thing that AI can do is quickly identify factors affecting turnover. For example, like if you're not paying what the market is, but if it went to the lower end, your business is obviously going to lose talent. AI can take a look at historical data, tell you which of your employees are most likely to be poached and by which competitor, and you can actually be able to build specific programs to retain those employees based off of all of this historical data and inputs, as well as current market stuff. So a lot of cool stuff going on right there. Again, workforce planning and strategy, another big one here. So we've talked about the difference between structured and unstructured data, and I'm sure I've bored the heck out of you now, but essentially we are basically looking at being able to approach a requisition based on what they know from machines instead of what they think, right? If you think about it now, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I think that this resume looks good. I kind of got a good feeling about this candidate. We're really going to essentially be able to eliminate that and be able to make decisions based off of actual inputs instead of gut feelings. So really, you're seeing hiring move from an art to a science, and that's going to be a really, really profound change, I think, for everyone in this industry. And certainly, you're already starting to feel it. Impact on recruiting. Could talk about this all day, but it's just basically going to make this easier, quicker. It's going to improve candidate experience. It's going to make sourcing much easier. It's going to make better matches and screening, and it's going to essentially find you better candidates without a whole lot of work. And all of those candidates who are silver medalists or don't actually get hired, it's not going to leave them with a bad taste in their mouth. I'm not going to belabor candidate experience statistics and their outcome in the bottom line, but AI is probably going to be worth the investment in that alone. So again, candidate care supported by chatbots. We've already talked about some of the use cases on post-hire engagement. So again, all sorts of stuff that are there. So have a lot of smart people saying a lot of smart things on there. You'll get this, but I'm not making this up. Like the world's greatest minds agree, this is really going to transform the way the world works. What's going to keep AI from actually succeeding? There are a couple things that experts, not me, have been saying that are going to influence the way that this innovation happens. One of those is human training, which is current machine learning driven AI systems require a whole lot of human intervention and programming, and there aren't a lot of people who know how to do that yet. So that's going to probably hinder some progress. Today, AI systems require a whole lot of data and information, and while that data is abundant, as we know, it's not always in places you can find it and can be used in a way to support an AI application. So, there is a limitation there. Obviously, knowledge of AI systems require human buy-in and adoption, and right now, relatively few people have enough knowledge to be effective at bringing these in and implementing these within the organizations. Open AI architecture, so the role of virtual assistants required managing the Internet of Things is actually going to require moving from these point solutions to an open architecture, which is just a really geeky way of saying that all of these different instances and standards are going to have to kind of come together and integrate, and all these third-party applications have to talk. So kind of a new standard of APIs. Obviously, there's the cost of upgrades. It's evolving real quickly. The set of technology companies have to commit budget, and that's really hard for HR. And then again, regulation, risk mitigations, every HR person's favorite thing to say no to new technology about. And the legal things are still pretty murky. So running short on time here. Sorry, this is obviously pretty dense deck, but there's some risks and concerns in here, so we'll kind of go through that. But all said, here's kind of where we're at. You're seeing AI is really just transforming everything quicker than we've ever seen before. And so, again, how are we preparing for an AI future? What should you look out for? It's basically, we'll know that we're there when we're more successful using tech at broader, less structured tasks, unifying all of those different and disparate styles of AI and specific use cases, and also being able to solve really complex technical challenges like transfer learning. So with that, we're doing up this Lemonade always. The quote from the movie, it can't be bargained with, it can't be reasoned with, it does not feel pity or remorse or fear, and it will absolutely not stop ever, which is probably actually a future chatbot trying to sell you a timeshare. So with that, I know that we are at the end of our time. Thank you for listening to me expand on a really, really dense, complex, and ambiguous topic. Thank you for suffering through my tangents, and big thank you to our sponsors at Smashfly. We're doing some really cool stuff in the space, by the way, and you should definitely check them out at smashfly.com. And just look at their solution set. It's a great example of a way that AI is helping to take a fairly traditional tool and technology set and really kind of accelerate it into the future. I know we did get some questions in, which makes sense, but unfortunately, we are at an end of our time. And I will be responding to each of those individually, so we'll follow up. And there's a lot of stuff in this deck, but all of you get a copy within the next 24 hours, sent straight to your inbox. So with that, again, huge, huge thank you for joining us today. And hasta la vista, baby.